And and basically, can you hold on? I've got a little something here. Okay. So basically, I work as a life coach with students one-on-one who are students of the Course in Miracles, integrating the principles of the Course into their life. Most of the time, our focus, of course, is on relationships. That's primarily where people have their issues. The books I've written, I translated A Course in Miracles into plain language because I found so many people. There you go. That's it. As well as I also did the workbook and manual for teachers. That's called Practicing A Course in Miracles. They're together in one book. And several of my articles, which I started writing when I started to do the life coaching in 2006, I started writing articles, and I have 4 volumes of that. They're called the ACIM Mentor articles. They're my most popular books because they are practical, about practical, everyday things. For the most part, sometimes there's a lot of theory in there as well. 4 Habits for Inner Peace, people consider to be, they call it A Course in Miracles Light. And it's basically the same ideas, but in non-religious terms and using gender-neutral terms. As some people are more comfortable with that. And then most recently, my book is A Memoir of Christ, a student of A Course in Miracles Awakens, and that is a memoir of all my what I call my former life when I was in ego consciousness, and all the way up to and then through my what I call the break, which was when I shifted consciousness in 2018, and up until very recently, and I ended it just at the beginning of this year. So that book details just about everything, and is the way people describe it is the first part is like a narrative, and the second part is like a passage through somebody's mind, the process I went through. And when I get done here, I'm open to discussion about anything I've written, anything at all, really. And I do prefer speaking with people rather than speaking at them. So I don't think I'm going to be speaking for very long. To give you a little bit of my background, like you said, I became a student in '84 when I was 20 years old. And very immediately had a revelation, which means I left consciousness and I was in God. And that was pretty shattering. But it also showed me that what the Course in Miracles was saying was right, that none of this is real, only God is real. And right on the heels of that, I experienced a holy relationship, which also validated what A Course in Miracles was teaching. So I went through a nice honeymoon period with all of that. And then, like everybody else, you enter the period of sorting out, and you're the wall of the ego. Right. I spent 7-8 years angry. I felt that I had been robbed of a normal life. I was only 20. I didn't even have time to get disillusioned with life. I hadn't even lived yet, and here I was shown that this isn't real. And it was, it was, of course, this split. On one hand, it was joyous, and there was liberation. On the other hand, there was rage. So I was living that split right out of the gate. And I identified very much with Helen. I totally understood her conflict. I felt very, when I, read her story, what is that first book by Robert Scott, Journey Without Distance? I just very much identified with her. I totally got her. I got why she was, she did it and yet was in this horrible conflict with it at the same time. I understood that. So I went on and was seriously a student on my own pretty much, because I found when I went to study groups, nobody was talking about the kind of mystical experience I had, and I thought they were applying it in a kind of a some almost quasi religious way, I mean, almost like it was a religious practice, but I didn't feel anybody was seeing the higher message of the course. And I ended up leaving the groups and pretty much being on my own with Spirit and developing that relationship, which took many years. The development of trust is the path we're on, as it says in the manual for teachers. To get into today's topic, which is that what I have come to understand is that we are living this experience of consciousness is an expression, not an assignment, as I put it. That is something that has evolved over 30 whatever years it's been now. I started off as very, very purpose oriented, very much into the story of the course as a student. I mean, as a teacher of God, first informally, because I had no notion at the beginning that I was going to teach. I had the excitement and enthusiasm all new students have, and you want to share it with everybody. But I also knew that you just couldn't. There wasn't an opening with most people to go into what the course is really saying, and you can't just tell people none of this is real. and it was also I didn't trust the passion I felt about it, because I thought that was probably ego, and if I was going to teach, which I wasn't even really thinking about, it would have to come from Spirit. It wasn't something. I didn't trust my own passion for it. Eventually, over the years, I often had questions. Everything I ever had was answered by the Holy Spirit, but there was one point that I would come to that it was like hitting a wall, and I couldn't get past it. But then I would kind of drift off, and then because something else would become more important, it was like I'd be learning that instead, and it was like I wasn't time for this point. And that point was that the thing that I couldn't get past was, if God was perfect, how could God have even an imperfect idea? So I got that this was all error. It was, this was a mistake. This wasn't real. But how could that even happen if God was perfect? And eventually, when I came to that question, I came to that question one more time, and this time I could not get past it. And I said to Spirit, I have to have an answer. I can't go on. And so the first thing Spirit said to me was, you're taking it too seriously. And I got that. I actually felt that, and I got that. And I felt with some relief, but I still needed an answer. And so so then what came in was what I call now the ontology that was given to me. And everything that was given to me is in A Course in Miracles, but not in one place. And it was given to me in my own words, as it were. And things that were given to me by Spirit generally everything evolved or fell away. If concepts that I was given, they were helpful for a time, and then they fell away because I had evolved and didn't need them anymore. The ontology, even though it really kind of came in very simply, it didn't come in with a lot of thunder. It wasn't, it was something I just said I had to have. I totally expected I'd have the same experience with this, and yet everything that followed fit in with it, and any question that came up was answered by it. And eventually what ended up happening was, in a way, I evolved into the ontology rather than it evolved away from me, or I evolved away from it. I evolved into it, unlike anything else that had been given me. And then when I had my shift in consciousness, the whole thing just came together in a way that everything had been answered before, but now I totally understood what it was saying. So here's what I was given that day. Because God is all, God must contain the idea of its own opposite. But because God is all, God cannot have an opposite. So it's a lot like, God said, what's my opposite? And then realize I can't have an opposite. I'm everything. So it's a lot like me as a person saying I'm a frog. What happens to that idea? Nothing, because I'm manifestly not a frog. I don't have to argue it. I don't have to do anything with the idea. It's just so not true. It just falls away. And so then I understood that it wasn't something real. It was just a meaningless idea. This was the opposite of God. And time, I now understood, was that idea being expressed like a story. So this idea began long ago. That instant of simultaneous, the idea of not God arising and simultaneously being undone because it's impossible, is expressed in time, where it seems like it began long ago and will be undone in some distant future. After my split, I really began to see this is the atonement. What is happening in time, what consciousness is that instant being expressed. It's almost like somebody said, here's a theme for, I want you to write a story. Here's a theme of undoing. Here's the theme. I want you to write a story. And that's what time is. And that's what's happening out there. The predestination, even though the Course says the script is written, I never could get predestination. I just thought it meant the outcome is inevitable. That inevitably all this will be undone. And I would hear people speak about predestination. I simply could not understand it. I could not understand how it worked. How was I supposed to make choices if everything was already chosen? And it wasn't until after my shift in consciousness that I came to understand, and it's so simple, that every choice I make is that. It's that unfolding, through this mind, that everything is the atonement unfolding. What felt like my personal choices was simply the atonement unfolding through me. I couldn't see it before because I saw myself really as separate from it. I felt my choices were my choices. I didn't understand that feeling was the atonement moving through me. And what I now understand more since the split, since the shift, is that I was never me living this, not me an individual apart from the whole. It was always just a whole. And all that I've ever been is this mind watching something pass through it. It's that instant passing through this mind. So that it's not, I've never really been on any kind of personal journey at all. That was the previous life, what I call ego consciousness. And there is no assignment, as I said, in that it's not that I have to go through and perfect a soul. It's not that I have to bring the atonement about. It's being expressed. And the experience of, and what I'm really experiencing, I'm just experiencing it is the point. Before in ego consciousness, I was identified with it. Now I'm still experiencing the person, but I'm not identified with it. And I can let her go and do her thing, which is a part of the atonement, which is frankly to me now meaningless. It's just a story unfolding in front of me. And it's just something passing through my mind. Everything in consciousness passes. Consciousness itself will pass. It's just that instant that's living through. So it's not like, it's not like I'm an individual soul that has to go into ego consciousness and then learn all this stuff and come out of it and be in spirit conscious and learn all this stuff and, advance. It isn't any of that at all. This is just an idea passing through my mind. It's just something I'm experiencing going through. And that fit finally perfectly with the ontology that was given to me. That everything in, that it's just this one instant is being expressed here. That it's already over. Everything is predetermined. So totally changed my relationship to everything going on within me, because when all this came clear to me through my shift in consciousness, which was very uncomfortable, 7 years of sometimes extreme discomfort, as I took a journey through ego like I'd never had before. It was in some place, I even thought of it as a harrowing at some point. It was a harrowing experience. I continue to be in that process. I'm still going through it, still experiencing parts of it. It's greatly diminished. It has wound down, but it seemed to wind up first. I seem to have gone into ego. I had been, by the time I went into this, I'd been a student for over 30 years and teaching it for many years. Had reached a point of peace that I knew was never going to leave me. Had trust in the Holy Spirit, which was, there's a correlation between the peace and the trust. Suddenly I was experiencing ego, back in it in ways I hadn't been before, experiencing it intensely. At the same time, having a certain detachment from it. But I totally lost myself. I didn't recognize the ego in me. I couldn't find spirit, because I understood now I was spirit and I didn't have that to turn to anymore, but I couldn't access it. It was there, but I didn't understand the ways that it was there. And I had to go through a long period of discovering this, acclimating to it, still acclimating, still watching it wind down. It was like this long journey. Like I said, what I mean by that is that I would go through these experiences that I ended up calling face it, because an issue would come up and it would be right there. And I would face it with a burning intensity. The first time I experienced this, I was actually on the freeway, and in the midst of this whole process going on, which was just filled my mind for several years. And it was like all of a sudden it was in front of me what I was going through, and I had been feeling grief. I knew this. I knew I was going through a long process of death and grief. But it was like boom, right in front of me. And it was like, face it. And I looked right at it. And after that, I just felt it with this extreme intensity. After that, that intensity seemed to be like the peak. And after that, forever after that, it kept diminishing. Anytime I had any of those experiences, whatever it was I was facing, guilt, fear, whatever form they were taking, it would then diminish after that. If I had any more of those experiences of it, it was diminish each time. Right. And in fact, I just went through just a couple of weeks ago another mini episode of Face It with other things. But each time I'm in such a better state than I was when I went through that. And through all of that, facing ego, facing my responsibility for it. In a way, that was the beginning of the process for me back in 2014, was when I had to face, it seemed like that's what I was bringing, what was coming up for me was my responsibility for ego and for separation from God. So I went through all of that, but at the same time I'm learning that all of this is just an expression, that this isn't. I also understood, and I want to make this very clear, that the process that I went through is not harrowing in itself, but was due to the limitations of my own mind. So that, in other words, things were being broken through, and that's why it was so hard for me. But that it isn't, and in fact, I can look back, and I sensed then, that I was being brought along. I knew I would come out of it. I just didn't know when. I didn't know how long I was going to be in that process. So I never thought that it was going to be some dark ending, even though I went through some very dark times. I just, but I sensed at the time, that there was, a purpose, I mean, not a purpose, but a plan for what I was going through. And now looking back, I can absolutely see that I was brought along very gently, even though it didn't feel gentle to me quite often, because like I said, the limitations of my own mind. And I can look back and I can see how it was a very gentle plan of this has to move before that can move. And, and it was just, very lovingly. I feel that now that I'm in a very loving process. And when I face the difficulties, I now I know it's just going to pass, and that I'm going to face things intensely, and then they're going to fall away. In the midst of all of going through all of that, this is when I'm learning that it's all an expression, that it's not personal. I wasn't going through anything personal. That's what was falling away. That's what had fallen away. But it did leave me with, at the end, a question. Why does A Course in Miracles hammer away so much at the idea of choice? Now, in my teaching before, I was all about choice. I was all about empowerment, and you have a choice. And yet now I'm seeing that I never chose a thing. And the only thing I can come up with, outside of the fact that I know it meets people in ego consciousness, and that's where they think they are. But there's the other side of that. There's a kind of a downside to that. It's that many people think they are trying to make that choice. They're trying to find that willingness. And they don't, and they end up feeling they're failing, and they feel even guiltier. So the fact of the matter is, some people are going to seem to make that choice, and others are going to seem to not make that choice. And the only thing I can come up with when I think about why is the Course, in a sense, it's reinforcing guilt, like with this idea of choice, choice, choice. But the one thing I can say is that it seems to me what it did was it wasn't so much teaching me that I had choice, it was showing me what I deeply believe. It was the deepest level of guilt, in other words, that a choice had occurred here. And the thing is, saying this to people, I understand that they're not going to see it unless it's their place to see it. It's their part to see it. Anything I teach, I just throw out there. I already knew after years of teaching, what I say to my clients. Sometimes I say the most profound things and they don't get it. And other times I say the simplest things and they find it profound.
Right.
So I've always known that what I throw out there, they're going to do with it whatever they're going to do with it. It's between them and spirit. It's not never what I intend. I'm always teaching myself. But in this case, I've had even a further shift in seeing that, teaching just is happening here, and then whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I mean, some people are going to get it, some people are not, some people get it later. Anything I put out there is, but this has shifted. This idea that it's an expression has shifted my whole way of looking at ego. Originally, it was this thing that had to be undone. It was this horrible evil almost. Even though I wouldn't use that word, I mean, basically, it was this bad thing that had to be undone. Eventually that evolved, and eventually I had come to see it as it was largely benign because it wasn't doing anything real, but it was still a horrible experience. But now I look at it in a very different way, because I was still looked at it as something that had to be undone, and that, if you weren't doing it, it was, a failure, you weren't willing enough and all that other. Now I see that it's a part of the atonement. What's there to atone for without the ego? It's like you need that for the whole story. I mean, so in other words, this idea passing through my mind is just that. It's not something that it's not an assignment. It's not something that has to be worked at. And what it does is it has taken away from me really any motivation for judgment. The Course says in the end, in the manual for teachers in particular, where it's talking about the process, that you're going to define all period of unsettling, which is what I'm in, is you're going to learn to not judge. And I had, I'd always kind of thought it was, how did you end up not doing that was, a question. And now I kind of understand it by seeing that if this is all an expression, that whatever anybody is doing in the moment is absolutely perfect. It's a part of it. It's like, it would be like looking at a movie and saying, well, That's not supposed to happen. Well, of course it is. That's in the script. You wouldn't have that story without it. It would be like saying, and most people know Pride and Prejudice, so I'll use that. It would be like saying that when Lizzie and Darcy are in conflict with each other, that it was wrong. And that later when they got together, it was right. And it's like, well, no, that's the whole story. There'd be no Pride and Prejudice if they both hadn't been experiencing Pride and Prejudice. So there's no wrong. There's no bad. I have compassion, of course, just automatically for anybody in ego, having experienced it, still experiencing it at times. I know what it is, but I also know it's not real. I know that it's passing. And so it has, it's still there's this ongoing acclimation and readjustment in my mind to the awareness, joyfully, that this is just an expression of an idea that is over and that has no real meaning. And I don't know if you all have read or know about Suzanne Siegel, who wrote the book Collision with the Infinite. She's somebody who, in a moment, her personal identity fell away. And I could relate, when I read her book, I could relate to much that she felt, because I felt that the person I was fell away. In fact, my whole life that I had fell away. I was happily married, had a home, dogs, my business, and all of that fell away in an instant, really. I struggled for 2 months to hold on to them, but they were gone. And she went, I could identify with much that she went through. Later, as she kind of advanced out, in her case, she was 10 years in terror after that happened, because she didn't, somebody asked me, what did I think was missing from her experience? Because as hard as my experience was, I always had God. Even though I felt I lost me, even though I couldn't feel spirit, I knew God was here. And she didn't have that aspect to her spirituality. So for one thing, I had that. So I didn't go into the sheer terror she lived in for 10 years. But later, as she began to be looking at consciousness as consciousness and from consciousness, she didn't understand what she was seeing. It was a mystery to her what was appearing. For me, I understand what's appearing. It's the story of the atonement. And it does, it is something now I just live in the moment and watch what's unfolding. And by that, I mean, not just what's going on out there, but in this mind, in these feelings, those are all a part of the atonement. There's nothing for me to judge, to resist. But if I resist, that's part of the atonement. It's like there's no wrong. And the most I can offer others now, who are still in ego consciousness, is to help them mitigate that. Because that's all I could ever do when I was in it. All I ever was doing was mitigating the pain of spirit consciousness. Mitigating the pain of ego consciousness. You don't attain spirit consciousness. It happens for some of us. And that is the atonement. Where it happens, who it happens for. And even that's really a false way of looking at it, because again, it's not personal. And that's of course exactly what falls away when you go into spirit consciousness. Any sense that this was personal, that this was for me, that I'm some sort of individual soul experiencing these things or going through these things. It's just this one mass unfolding, and this mind is experiencing that passing through it. And I continue to watch the shift in my experiences of things as I see that everything is unfolding perfectly. And when I see others in pain, I now recognize that that's a part of the process. I had pain, I still have pain. Pain is just a part of the experience. It is a passing experience, and it will pass within consciousness, and then consciousness itself will pass. So now that's what I have to share about that, and I'm open now to questions about that, about anything I've written, anything else I've said.
That's excellent. Now, I'd like to start off, if it's okay, with a question from a friend of mine who sent me a Facebook message a couple of days ago, and she couldn't make it here today, so she asked me to ask you a question. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Just 2 seconds before we start the questions. I'd just like to say, Elizabeth, that, you know, for somebody that says they can't speak, that was a hell of a job you just did. And
I never said I can't speak. I just prefer speaking with people than speaking at them.
I can relate to what you're saying, because I had my awakening in 2003. And I've had my stuff with the ego now for back and forth, like you're talking about, about 16 years.
Yeah.
But it becomes like sort of, okay, here's another one. And you get
Exactly.
to, you know, yeah.
Oh, okay, I have to go through this. All right, yeah.
So I can relate completely. And it was
right.
really, I'm going to tell you, it was wonderful. The whole thing was just spot on. It was great.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, I just want to chime in here too to say that I've certainly experienced it myself, and we call it the eye of the needle, Liz. You know, the outside ring of fear. And the one, and I mean, I could go on, you know, about this for an hour, but basically, terror is the word. And you used terror earlier when you were describing Suzanne's experience. That's the word that I would use as well. I've gone through it intermittently for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So I hear you, but I'm just going to go ahead now and read.
That's a piece of cake, though. 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
We joke about it, you know.
Right. We try to joke about it.
Right.
This is a question from Kathy. She couldn't make it today. She said, will you ask Liz how long her darkness lasted? And does she still experience any now? And then she also asked if you had took any type of like antidepressants during your darkest times. So that's a threefold question.
Yeah. I would say that it's 7 years, roughly, and ending in this year. It started in 2014. It actually began with the death of a dog of mine, and I think I had already been having thoughts that would come to my mind that I was dying. I never took it to be that I was physically dying. Anyway, one of my dogs, a dog died suddenly, unexpectedly. She was unexpectedly poisoned, and I actually, just before her, another dog had died rather naturally. He had a very sweet passing, just a month before, and already something was stirring in me. And then she went, and something wasn't right. You know, I was experiencing this to a degree that just didn't seem right. You know, it was disproportionate. There was this anguish. It just didn't seem related to their deaths. I mean, I'd been through a lot of grief before, you know, and I knew the process. And that really was when it began. And I went through right away something I called the mansion in the shack. And that was where I realized that I'd been living in a shack, the ego, all my life. And that the mansion was right there, and it had always belonged to me. And this went through a bunch of different things with that. But that was when I started to feel the responsibility that I was talking about earlier. And I started to sense then that something was starting that was going to go on for a while. And I hated that idea, but I often had on my path sensed things were going to happen and how long, kind of a general sense of how long they, you know. And I knew I just didn't want to see that I was beginning a long and very difficult process. And it went on you know, and then when the break happened, let me just kind of tell you, it wasn't all darkness. In the midst of this, what really brought the real darkness on was the light. It came in 2017. In August of 2017, just before that, I had been experiencing what I called the barrenness, this dry emptiness. And suddenly it shifted, and I was in this wonderful spaciousness. And into that spaciousness came the golden light of love, which I considered to be Christ. I didn't call it that yet. I only came to understand that later. Anyway, this light just blazed in my mind, and with it came this burst of creativity. I wrote a work of fiction, and then another work of fiction, and then soon after that, in came another holy relationship, which is ongoing. So it wasn't, it wasn't like it was all darkness, but even though this beautiful golden light had come, and I was in this beautiful state of love, there was always this darkness, there as well, this terror, like you said, going on. So eventually, that's soon after that, like a year later, I was divorced. And then I went to Australia for a year to be with Hannah, with whom I have the holy relationship. And I spent a year there, it was the most difficult. Maybe it got more difficult when I came back, but it was very difficult time for both of us. I came back after a year, and came back into, even, like I said, there was kind of like more darkness. Sometimes just almost a despair, even though I trusted I'd get out of it. So it was kind of like just holding on through it feeling. I wasn't depressed. I did feel depression at times through it, but I knew what it was. I was just a part of this. It never occurred to me, because I understood I was in some remarkable process, that it never occurred to me to take medication for this. I wasn't in any kind of clinical depression. I knew that, and I knew exactly what I was going through. I knew it was ego death. I don't think I was quite calling it that yet. I had read when I was younger about ego death. It's usually through Buddhism, Buddhist things that I would touch on. In fact, I avoided Buddhism because it scared me, because they talked about ego death. It was something I never wanted to experience, and yet I sensed the liberation. So it was kind of, I'm attracted but repelled, and the usual duality, and so I ended up going through your classic ego death. In fact, I quote in my book. Somebody had sent me this when I was kind of in the midst of it. It's this quote about, it's the Buddhist parable about this man who he was in a boat, knowing he was on his way to Buddha, and joyful, and he looks into the water and he sees something coming towards him, and when it gets nearer, he sees it's him, it's his body, and he starts wailing. That's exactly it. That's exactly what it was. I had to go through that for liberation. I basically understood what I was going through. That what bothered me was not knowing how long, not knowing how difficult, how much more difficult it would become, if more difficult. And then, so it started to lighten up. Maybe a year ago, maybe a little less than that. But this year has been really, I finished my book in the very last part of my memoir, because it is pretty dark. In my afterword, I put in a what do you call it? A journal passage, a journal entry that I had. Was it earlier this year, in March or something? I can't remember quite when I had it. It was the first time I've had this experience, but it was what I came to call the Cosmic Chuckle. And it was this feeling of, I felt uplifting joy before, but I'd never felt this. This was pure, like nothing I felt before. And it was laughing at me. When I was thinking about the darkness I'd been through, and it's like, oh, you're so silly. That's what it was like. Oh, you're just so silly. And I just felt this joy and this lifting, and I just saw the absurdity of it. And it's not that the darkness didn't come again, but that cosmic chuckle came, and then it came again later, and then it came again later, and I started to think of Christ as the Joker, and in fact, a Harlequin has really become kind of my symbol for Christ. Or Joker symbols, like the Joker card, are like symbols of Christ to me now. Because of that, it's just this lightening of being. And ever since that came, I haven't had, I don't think I've even had the need for that to come. It's just, there's just been a lightening ever since. So I would say, if you wanted to kind of measure it, I'd say 7 years of darkness. Just, it's such discomfort. And finally this year, I was able to get back to meditating in a way I hadn't been able to for years. I kept trying, but it was just copious processing. That was all that was really occurring.
Right.
And I have a kind of a still center point that I have never had before when I meditate, and I'm able to. It's odd. I have this new posture when I meditate that I never had before, and it's this, like a traditional prayer posture. I never did anything like that. I always just kind of, sat. And when I do that, it's like I'm looking at something deeper. Sometimes I'm going into the center point, but I just, it's just funny how these things show up, and even in our posture and our behavior. So anyway, that is it. And I just one of the reasons, the book was written was to help people go through, these things. I read, like I meant, Suzanne Siegel, and I read Jan Fraser's experience. She wrote When Fear Falls Away. She literally had the ego fall away overnight. And hers was just a joyous experience. She had 18 months of acclimation, but that was it. The woman never had any darkness or anything. So I read those two. Suzanne Siegel was only in the past year, but I had read Jan Fraser's when I got to Australia. And what was the point I was going to make about, just getting support through this process is, first of all, basically I'm a first generation A Course in Miracles student. I began in '84. I mean, the book came out in '75. So we just haven't had a lot of time for, people to go through, to actually kind of manifest what the Course is talking about. And, we're just the leading edge here. And I wanted that to be, that's not even the right way to say things anymore. It's just, I know that this is written because, this is to be a record out there for people to have something to look at and to know somebody gets through it. Right. Some people, it's really interesting because, of course, we all know that people read their own stuff into things and what people read into. There are people who, I find that the people who take a more feeling approach to things, they find Christ in my book, in my memoir. The people who are more intellectual tend to go more towards which would have been my way, go towards the dark and the fear, and it's so dark, Liz, and it scares me, and am I going to have to go through that? And I'm like, what I want you to know is that you'll get through it if you do. If it's your place to go through it, you will come through it. There's an actual, I can feel there's an actual unfolding design here, and it's been loving, and all of the agony's been from my end, and that's really no surprise, is it? I mean, we know that we're facing the limitations of our own mind, and now, primarily what I want people to get is that wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing, it's perfect. If you're in ego consciousness, that's where you're to be, and just be there. Don't fight it. Don't resist it. I think we just naturally seek to mitigate it, and in our own ways. And some people are going to be moved to go to drugs. Some people are going to be moved to seek things, spiritual answers or what have you. But no matter where a person is, it's perfect. And that is applied not just to us, but to our loved ones and everything else, is learning, I mean, and this is the other thing, is I know when I say this to people, some people are going to get it and other people aren't, and that's fine. That's the way it is, it's, you're not going to, it's one of my things lately thinking about is what, spiritual admonishments, in which to me, in a way, kind of have a kind of a cruelty to them, but I think it's an unintentional, for example, to love your brother as yourself, to love everybody equally. In the ego consciousness, you just can't. And to try to do that you end up in feeling you're failing. And what I'd rather say to people rather than to be this way, is know that within you, there is this other consciousness. Find it, get in touch with it, lean on it, let it guide you, rather than try to be like that, because you're going to fail. In the ego consciousness, that's not what it is. And that's not what you're supposed to be experiencing, the ego consciousness. When that's what's passing through your mind, that's what you are to be experiencing. It's not wrong, it's not bad. I used to teach it was an error or a mistake, and now I understand that's not true at all.
Right.
And yeah.
It really makes perfect sense. And I've learned so much myself from going through this experience. I mean, what you learn by going through the experience is absolutely, irreplaceable. But the couple of things, just going to give a couple of insights about, what I learned about when I went through it. Number one, I really think that that the mind has decided when this is going to happen. So in other words, it's like direct revelation, it says that the mind has decided when direct revelation is going to happen. It's the same thing with what we call the eye of the needle. The mind has decided when it's going to happen. And I know for me, I was given some premonitions, when I look at them now, like certain dreams, for example, that had symbols that were showing me the terror that I was going to go through.
Yeah.
Mighty companions, a couple of mighty companions came into my field of awareness to help me go through it, because they too were going through it. So we kind of went on the journey together. So there's just so many factors that come together, and you learn so much by going through it. But just very quickly, I'll just tell you what happened to me. I was out for lunch with a friend, and I came home one afternoon, and I felt a very tremendous pressure in my head. And I had no idea what it was, but I found it very frightening, because I felt terror, in my mind. And I asked the Holy Spirit what it was. And the answer I received was, the mind of God is here, and you're sliding into home base, which is when the ego screams the loudest. Right?
Right.
So I knew like what was happening. And then I heard subconscious and the unconscious terror was coming up with a vengeance, and that it was the fear of God. Now, at that point, I went through a 23-day severe bout of I just felt like I was being terrorized from the minute I got up till the minute I went to bed at night. There was no break whatsoever. That was for 23 days. Then, of course, I figured it was over. So when that broke, that was the end of it. You could call that spiritual naivety. I didn't have a clue, because that went on intermittently for a period of 2.5 years. And I have learned not to have any expectations. There's times that it's so dark that the Holy Spirit will not feel available to you. But the Holy Spirit is there. And like you just mentioned, you think that you've done something wrong, you feel guilty because of it. It's actually because you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Like St. John of the Cross says that coming to love only God is the very gravitational pull that ensures its inevitable arrival. The dark of the soul, whatever. Yeah.
I had a couple of great premonitions too. I ended up in a psych ward a couple of times. That was quite the experience.
Right.
But again, like you say, even when that was happening to me, I had this total understanding that it was okay.
Yeah.
And that I wouldn't be in there for more than 3 or 4 days. Even though when I was admitted once, they thought I'd been there for months. And after about 4 days, he let me go home. And I remember sitting down with the psychiatrist, and he said, we don't know what happened to you, and we don't even know we're letting you go home. But I was right back to,
Yeah, you know, you'd
we
probably
told normal.
benefit. Yeah, you'd probably benefit from Suzanne Siegel's story, because she thought she had, you know, she's all sorts of psychiatrists and everything to understand what she was going through. 10 years she went through that, you know.
Yeah.
And because she didn't really have, even though she had gone through transcendental meditation and they had warned her about, you know, the ego dropping away, and she seemed to have forgotten it. And so she kind of went the psychological route, and they were pointing to all these things. It turned out in the very end of her story, you find out that she on top of this occurring for her, she did have some dissociation going on with some other things. So she had kind of a dual thing going on. So she did have some psychological trauma coinciding, you know, surfacing, coinciding with this. But yeah, so, you know, that, you know, you do wonder about people who end up in psych wards and things sometimes, you know, what really is going on, you know, when something, especially when it comes unexpectedly. Yeah.
Well, I really wanted to wake up, and I think I was sort of rushing things a little, if that's possible. I don't even know. But that's where I ended up. But, you know, I got through it. I even had premonitions that I was going to be in there. Holy Spirit sort of warned me, and that I would get through it, you know, unscathed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in every incident when I've had, you know, stuff coming up like that, I've always had a premonition that it's going to happen and that it's going to be okay. It passes. Right. Even though, you know, it can be terrorizing when you're first going through it. But, and when you were talking about, you know, your books helping people going through this kind of thing, it's so true, because I remember when I first started to go through it, I had no one to talk to.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about this at all. And so I had to bear it all on my own. I couldn't talk to my family. They thought I was crazy anyway.
Yeah.
But that's what's happened since Stephanie and I came together a couple of years ago. The Holy Spirit seems to be using us as a catalyst to what the same thing you're doing, is to help people that are going through this kind of thing at this time, because there is a great awakening happening right now. There's more people waking up at this time than ever in history, as far as I'm concerned. And it's great when, you know, you do have some help. You don't think you're going crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and you know, and you know what happened with Suzanne Siegel was, she had gone, you know, transcendental meditation is more of a Hindu. It's the Hindu way. What happened was eventually somebody pointed her to a Buddhist, and the Buddhists have extensive, you know, teachings on ego death. And finally, after 10 years, somebody pointed her towards the Buddhist, and that's when she finally got some relief and answers in what she was experiencing. They were all delighted. Oh my God, this is wonderful. One guy even said, "You're in bliss." I mean, while she's, you know, severely depressed, you know, you're in bliss. You just don't see it, you know. And he was so excited for her because they understood what she was going through. And so it does. No two people are going to go through the exact same thing, because what we're breaking down is the unique expression of these, you know, our seemingly individual minds. And but it does help to know this kind of thing occurs, you know, just even to know that, and that there were some things. The weirdest thing for me, you know, like I said, I was happily married. I had been with my wife for 24 years, married for 23. And I suddenly heard Liz was gone. And I did not feel that Liz anymore. I did not, so therefore I did not feel for her what I had felt before. To me, her Liz died. And Suzanne Siegel discussed the same thing to her. She was trying to, when it all happened to her, she was gone, and she was married, and she was no longer the woman her husband had married, you know, and of course he didn't understand, and they ended up divorced. In my case, I left. That life was gone. I mean, it was just gone. And then that person is gone, and has, you know, I remain with her memories. I feel that, you know, for the people in my life, I feel, you know, detached affection. And, but nothing like, you know, the attachments, I guess I wouldn't say that I had, that the other Liz had, you know, because she's just gone. And that was startling. And even though I didn't read about Suzanne Siegel, I mean, it was so clear to me what had happened that they, in a way, that was almost a validation in itself, and that it was very clear, very stark. So there's no denying what happened. Still reading, and like I said, only this year reading Suzanne Siegel's descriptions of it, I thought, oh gosh, this is exactly what I felt, you know. But then again, that's the portion of what she went through that was familiar to me, but other things she went through weren't, you know. And so it, you have to know you're going to be going on your own unique journey. And you know, you mentioned expectations. Boy, those become a problem. You don't really know what spirit consciousness is until you're in it. And we see it from the outside, we read about it, we think we know what it means, but we don't know that the entire time we're in ego consciousness, we are reading through guilt and fear, and it is distorting what we read. And I think often people miss the miracle that's in front of them because they have an expectation of what this is going to look like and what it's going to feel like.
Right.
And then it comes, and it's the, like, you know, people say, well, you know, that doesn't sound like, you know, spirit, you know. And it's like,
Right.
it is, you know, it's you know, it's that fear or that specialness or that's whatever. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm describing. But you know, there's no way to convey it. And you know, when it's real, it doesn't matter that you can't convey it. You know,
Right.
it's when you're still learning something that you have the itch to convey and press it on other people as well.
So true. Yeah. And like you say, you can only share your experience, and there's a great gift in that, you know, just so the other person can see and feel that they too can get through it.
Yes, exactly. That you will get through it. I knew I would. I just did not know how long.
Right.
Yes,
You know.
well, when the course says the ego goes from suspiciousness to viciousness, you know, when we first read that, we have no idea what that means.
Right.
It's like,
Oh yeah, vicious is the word. Treacherous, just
Yeah.
deadly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And you don't think
Yeah.
you're going to survive the day. Like you don't
Yeah.
think you don't think that you're going to live to the end of the day. I mean, that's the way I felt. There was times I didn't think I was going to survive.
and you know, you hear people say, "Oh, just ignore the ego or change your thoughts." It's like it's not that easy.
Yeah, and again, you know what happens. I think what happens is people have a spiritual shift, and then they go out and they think they're doing it, and so then they'll go out and they'll teach people, well, just do this, like I am, just stay present, you know,
Yeah,
or
right.
you know,
Yeah.
just love everybody unconditionally, just be happy. You know? And it's
Yeah.
like, no, you know, you can't.
And that's when you want to strangle them, right?
Right. And it's like, but they write these books and people, and it's like, I'm just doing this, you know, I'm just be present, you know, and it's like, it's not, you're in a different consciousness, but they, you know, they don't know that, or they don't, you know, they didn't, so often they've come to it suddenly. It wasn't a process. They didn't have any background. And one of the real benefits of Course in Miracles is its psychological approach. You know, it's not just,
Right.
you know, it brings in, to me, I've always said it's Eastern religious philosophy in Christian language and psychology. And it brings in the awareness of guilt and fear and the prevalence. I mean, to say it's prevalent in ego is silly, because it is what ego is. So it, you know, the prevalence of it there, and just kind of laying a foundation so that if this shift happens, you do know what's going on. And you know, but I do think a lot of times that what happens is there are teachers that just, they do think they're doing something, and that it's in what happens in spirit consciousness is these things just happen naturally.
Right.
You know, it's not a practice.
Right.
In ego consciousness, we have to practice it to mitigate ego. But when it's natural, so for them, it's coming naturally, and they're like, well, just do what I do. You know, it's like, it's nothing you're doing. The doing follows the state of consciousness. It's not the other way around. You've got the cart before the horse. If you think that being centered is going to make you spirit, aware of yourself as spirit. No, you'll get in touch with spirit within you, maybe, but that shift where now you are spirit, you're immortal, and you're not this body, that this is just an experience you're having, and it comes in glimpses sometimes for some people. And so for some people, it comes in glimpses only. For some people, they're there for a while and come back out of it. Other people, go into it and stay there. And it's all a part of the atonement unfolding through our mind.
Right.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, are you saying then that you have to trust the process of what's happening?
Yeah.
It's not just about being present and being in spirit. It's about
right. Yeah, exactly. So if you're an ego, this is where you are to be.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you need to go and indulge it and glorify in it.
Absolutely.
It just means that just understand that there's nothing wrong, and that then turn to spirit and say, okay, I'm here. So what I'm here, and be there with spirit, and that will mitigate it, and then it will manifest the atonement.
Right.
The thing is, everything is the atonement, but some are what I call manifest teachers, or they manifest the atonement because they manifest undoers is what I call them, because they know, they're conscious of truth, they're aware of truth to some degree, whether that is just the vaguest idea of, the presence or all the way up to, Christ consciousness. Anywhere in between, these are people that are manifest there, but there are other people who never seem to. They're like the supporting players who just never drawn to spiritual things, or and that's their part to play, and that is exactly what they're supposed to be and do.
Liz, is it okay now? I have another question. We had two, but
Sure.
the dog disappeared for a moment, so we'll just go with Gracia. Gracia says, please, Elizabeth, talk more about opportunities for family relationships to be healed. Please.
Okay. Yeah, please call me Liz. Only my mother called me Elizabeth. Anyway.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, Liz. Opportunities to heal. What happened for me was that there came a point, I was, when I got married, I was 30, I guess I was 30, 31. And I already knew that nobody out there could save me. I mean, I'd gotten over the whole Cinderella idea, yet I still sometimes would have, let's say, moments of neediness, and I would kind of be turning to my wife, and even though I knew she couldn't fix me, I knew it. One day it just occurred to me that the only thing that was going to do that was spirit, and I had this shift where suddenly, boop, that was my primary relationship, and so from then on, I basically saw that every relationship, everything I did, whether any interest I took, the work I did. At the time I was cleaning houses. This was long before I was teaching. All my relationships, everything had one purpose, and that was to be with spirit. And so when it comes to, your relationships with others, again, there's this idea of healing the relationship. Step back a bit, because sometimes what we feel like is, this needs to be done. This needs to be fixed. And then sometimes we feel a block. And one thing I've learned, that block often means not yet or not now. So what I would say about a family relationship, or that is, be with it as it is without judging it as wrong or bad. Everybody in it, everybody in the relationship, or relationships, is playing a part, and if you can be present with spirit, then you'll know if there's something to do. Whether that's something you have to heal in yourself, whether that's something you need to say to somebody else. So cultivate that relationship with spirit, and accept things as they show up. Step back, because what the even before my shift, I was beginning to understand that ego is always in the minutia, and spirit's always step back and looking at the bigger picture. So it's kind of like if we're all like we were all threads in a tapestry. The Holy Spirit's looking at the whole tapestry. We're looking at our little thread and every little thread around us, and we think that's it, and there's just everything flows into everything else, and everything is interconnected, and so it's not always wrong. It's never wrong. In fact, there is no wrong. Everything that is unfolding perfectly. So I tend to even see the love behind the conflict. Often because, sometimes it's not even just an awareness of what's really beyond everything appearing. Sometimes it's even there. I had a client tell me about her son and daughter at like a family holiday, arguing over something. And I could just see the love there because it was so, they so clearly cared about each other, that they were trying to reach each other. It turned into an argument, but that's what was going on, is they were each trying to, and so there is, the conflict is often just the thinnest veil over the love there. And just human relationships are inherently conflicted because we're all different, and the conflicts aren't always bad. They can lead to growth and to healing. This isn't always in your time frame, So kind of step back with the Holy Spirit and say, is there anything I need to do? Not even just what do I need to do here? Is there anything I need to do? How do I see this? Try to look at the bigger picture.
That's excellent.
Beautiful.
I love what you just said about, if you're in touch with the spirit, you will know if you have to say something, in a loving manner, loving and clear manner. It's just really, that really is what it's all about. Just, yeah. Now, Doug had a question, but I don't think he's here. I'm just going to double check. Okay, no, Doug disappeared. The disappearance of Doug. Disappearance of the
Right.
And is there anybody else? Is there anybody else that has something? Patty, I have. Okay, this is from Patty. A second now. Patty says, I have experienced much of what you are speaking of, and the eye of the needle. But in the eye of the needle, I have discussed these experiences and what I have described as my awakening with another Course in Miracle friend, and she tells me that it is my ego telling me this. All this is what is happening, but could my ego be fooling me? And when will I know? I hope that that's a clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I started questioning myself because I've been knowing this for a year, and I've used the word certainty more this year than I have ever used the word certainty in my life. But when she said that, I consider her well-versed in the Course and older than I am and have been in the Course much longer. So it did get me questioning, could my ego be tricking me?
What have you been experiencing? If you want, are you willing to share it?
Sure. Last year at this time, I felt like I was sliding back into a depression that I had experienced 20 years previously. I could feel myself slipping. So I asked for help from Jesus and Holy Spirit, asked what was going on and that I needed help. And in January, I just experienced this feeling that my heart was wide open, and literally, I describe it kind of jokingly now as Jesus said, oh my goodness, her heart is so big, so open right now. We got to get in there now when it's open.
Right.
And in the process, a lot has come up, and through it all, I've trusted. It's been very painful, but I have trusted that this is the path, and this is what's going to bring me closer to God. And like, it's almost like I have felt deeper pain than I've ever felt in my life, but at the same time, the exact same time, I feel this underlying peace and joy that I've never felt. It's almost two extremes of in the same situation. You know, it can be one situation that brings up the feelings of pain, but then I still feel the joy and I still feel the peace. And I think it can only come through the trust that I feel that and my poor husband, he'll come in and are you okay? And I'll be doing some coursework of some sort. And I'll say, yeah, I'm struggling a bit today. And I can't really discuss my emotions I can discuss my emotions, but I can't really explain to him the spiritual part. He knows that God is involved. And so the last time that I had a major upset was only a few weeks ago, and it doesn't last as long now, which I'm very grateful for. It's very intense, but it doesn't last as long. So I am grateful for that. And he said, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm really okay. I'm struggling right now, but you know what? I'm not afraid of it anymore because I know it's going to take me even closer to God.
Yeah.
So that's the best way I can describe it.
It sounds genuine to me. It really does. You know, you're describing the things I've experienced. This, even you're saying certainty, saying that you've said that more, you know, even knowing that you just can't convey to somebody else. It's very hard to explain.
Before I even started picking up the word in the book, my word was certainty.
Yeah. And there's no real way to convey this internal experience because we're limited by the words we have that sound like all these other things we've said before.
Yes.
And so it's just what's happened with your depression?
It's nowhere to be found.
Yeah. So I think you
nowhere
were
to
feeling
be found. I mean, I get intense.
Advent.
I get intense emotions around situations. Mostly it's about missing someone that's fallen away out of my life, and I miss that person. And so I get these intense emotions around the person. But I want to thank you. And I also want to thank Stephanie and Lloyd for bringing in other guest speakers that have been through this, because I thought, well, if it was an awakening, I would never feel these emotions anymore.
Yes.
I would never, that it would clear me from all of that, and I would suddenly be Jesus, never have these human feelings again.
Right.
So I felt like maybe she was right. And now I'm hearing that no,
it's quite the opposite.
Because this has happened, everything has to come up.
But what happens, and you do feel it intensely, but it passes quickly. And Jan Fraser said this because people had that idea that this is what happens: is all your feelings fall away, and you don't have any of them. And she shared in something about her dog died, and she said she just felt intense grief, just stabbing grief for a little while, and then boom, it was gone. And what happens is you feel the emotions, but intensely, and then they're gone. And
because you're not afraid to look at them anymore.
Yeah. One thing I've come to realize is, when you hear the term "living life to the fullest," and you think of people, they jump out of out of airplanes, or they do some of these extreme things. And really, living life to the fullest is feeling what you're feeling right now to the fullest extent that it is here. And then, you know what? It goes.
That's perfect. That's an amazing description.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I want to say, I just want to say something, Liz, though, because I in my life, for my current life, I have gone through periods where I keep looking at it over and over and over and over and over and over again. You know what I'm saying? Like I've
Looking at what? Over
every-
and over and over again.
whatever it happens to be. Fear,
Whatever,
You
so
name-
you're saying like whatever comes up,
right?
it comes up again and again,
Yeah.
like they talk about the onion layers or something.
Absolutely.
That's
So
it, yeah.
I've done a lot of that in this lifetime. And I know for a fact that I have been very courageous in looking at myself, my specialness, all the things, the garbage, everything that's coming up and whatever it may be. So I've really dedicated to exposing the ego. And I've done it over and over again. And I know I've been successful in forgiving a lot of it. But I just want to speak to that, maybe about the repetition, the having to do it over and over again.
Well, as long as it comes up, you're going to do it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, just let it come up and be with it and let it pass,
Right. And
because it's not, what else are you going to do with it? I mean, it's there.
right.
So you've got to do something with it. And at this point, the only thing that's going to make sense to you is to just look at it and
Right.
be with it and say, okay, it's this again.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Myron Jones says, or Myron Jones wrote a book called Holy Spirit, It's Me Again.
Right. Right. And so, it's just until it's not there, what are you going to do? You're going to have to just look at it and be with it and let it pass by.
That's very good. Thank you. And, I do see the healing in my mind in many, many ways. My daughter and I used to have a special relationship, and if something happened between us, that could put me in a major tizzy.
Yeah.
For like 6 days, I'd be in a state of fear, anxiety, whatever. But now her and I, we have a holy relationship. This total healing, 100%. And my mom, the same way. So what I'm saying is that I know healing is happening. And I'm willing to stick with it and hang in there with it.
And we talk about holy relationships now. Sometimes that's with an individual, but in truth, when you're awake, you have a holy relationship with everyone,
Right.
because everyone.
There's no difference. There's no distinction.
Right.
No,
So there's to say to one person with all. I mean, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just, as in the atonement, as the Course points out, in many phrases that, about that the teachers of God have a special function, it will say, in the atonement and holy relationships, with one another or whatever can be one way that shows up, that function. And, who knows what it is, you have to let it unfold. Now, Helen and Bill, obviously, it was a Course in Miracles. They had a very distinct special function, but it says there are, teachers of God too, and that their partner will show up in the, whatever time. And so when you're experiencing it, I don't experience any distinction, between the one and the all.
Right.
It's just, in a sense, it's almost like you're in this bright light and then it's a little brighter right there, I mean, so it's like,
Yep.
it doesn't, it's all the same.
Yes. Well, it represents the relationship with the Father and the Son.
Right.
And that's a beautiful place to be.
Right.
Yeah.
What I tell
Yeah,
people, you have to die before you die.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Now, Winnie has a raised hand. Winnie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, if I understand you correctly, you're somehow saying that I get the sense that I'm here, not moving anywhere, but life is moving through me or something like that. So I was wondering, how are you coaching people? I mean, how can you, I can ask in another way, are there some kind of advices that you say one approach to the course are more helpful than others, or is it just letting life unfold as it does and then try to look at the spirit, or do you, I mean, for instance, I felt guided to start reading the course again on my own, and that was a bit surprise to me, because I mean, I have been doing it with other people, and I think oh, I'm not able to do it alone. I can't really get it, but I can feel I can understand a lot more now than I had ever been able to do that before. So how do you
Are you asking how do I work with people one-on-one when I know that whatever's happening is perfect and is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for instance, I'm asking you now, then how would you approach me? What would you reflect back to me or something for what would be helpful?
I find I meet people where they are. So I tend to say, especially up front before I know them well, I tend to kind of teach what I know and then see what they can take in and accept. And for example, what I'm saying here today, a lot of people, and I couldn't have, like I said, the idea of predestination, for heaven's sakes, I just could not get that at all. And I have clients I work with on an ongoing way that I've tried this idea out on, so to speak, and they can't accept it. So then, okay, I back up, so to speak, and meet them where they are and with what they can understand and with what is pressing in front of them at the moment. A relationship, something at work or just even understanding a certain concept or whatever. So I just kind of meet them where they are. And in a way, I just let whatever spills out of me spill out of me. And I figure whatever it is supposed to be said, right? And it's what they need to hear or whatever's happening, whatever dynamic. Because, I said before that it's not just out here that what's appearing, in consciousness, but it's our thoughts and feelings. And I now understand that the things I think and feel are not just, they're not for me alone. There's no me alone. It's a part of the whole thing. So there's kind of like an energetic exchange between all of these things. So it's, so therefore I just I'm just present and whatever comes out. And, and I'm not sitting there thinking, well, this isn't exactly right anymore. I now know the truth. I kind of meet them where they are. And if they're very much into having a purpose in the world, for example, then, I will help them with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sounds very good. Now, 2 other people have raised hand. Okay, Winnie, Eli, you're on the air. You got to take yourself off mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Liz, I wondered, you say you have sessions with one-on-one is how you like to. Do you do that? Does it have to be in person or do you have sessions on Zoom?
No, it's on Zoom. It's Zoom or Skype or on the phone.
Okay, and where do we find this information then if we wanted to have a session with you?
acimmentor.com.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to put this here. I'm actually going to send a message to everyone now. So acimmentor.com.
Yes. That's it. Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
This is absolutely wonderful.
Mm.
Is there anybody else that has anything they'd like to say or Liz? This is a great gift here today.
Terrific.
Yes.
Really been
Absolutely
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Liz,
Liz, I just want to say,
yeah.
I find that the most hard to understand for people is that the script is written and
Yeah.
all predetermined. That seems to be, the most hard for people to accept.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I couldn't until I could see it for myself. Well, and that's kind of always the way I've been anyways. I have to see it for myself. I don't accept ideas just because I've read them in a book.
Yep.
I can't just somehow force it on myself. So, it's sort of been always a fascinating process for me, in the way I come to see things and in the way I would find in time that I was writing about things often, when I wrote over the years, like I said, I have 4 volumes of my articles. Over the years, when I wrote my articles, I now accept questions from people. I mean, I have for the past few years, but I mean, when I started, I didn't, and I was just kind of spewing what was going on with me, really. I would have it in my mind a certain way, but when it came to writing the article, and clarity was always my thing. I would realize how much I didn't really know about something or really understand or realize, oh my gosh, I'd see it from a different angle. And when in the writing it would come out, it would just kind of, the answer would, eventually it would work its way out, and kind of this ongoing discussion I would have with spirit. And then it would show up in the article or what have you. And in the process, I would be shifted and moved, and my understanding would expand. But a lot of what the way I come to see things, to seeing that, is in the mind, that it's kind of a fascinating thing that it would just be.
What
It's
happened?
just there and there and there and there, and then it emerges. And in a way, I do live there, but I know that my outer life just doesn't reflect it. You know what I mean? It's like I live elsewhere now, for example, and in a way I can't explain to others. In my book, I described it as I felt like a ghost in the world for a while. And now there's just a sense of living elsewhere. And it's kind of like I'm now living in that, where those ideas used to come from to me. I'm living there. And it's in the ether is really kind of how I feel like I live in the ether. But it was always a fascinating process, how the teaching would come, and yet I just was living in ordinary life, and you wouldn't see it. So it was always like, there's more to me than you can see, and there's no way to convey it.
Yeah. What I did was I asked Spirit to help me understand that principle. The script is written, and that was about 4 years ago. I started asking that question.
Yeah.
And since then, I've received multiple
Insights about it. Yeah.
Visions of future events.
No.
And then when they happen like I had the vision exactly.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
And then Jesus says to me, well, I'm just showing you that there is no future. You're looking at the past. It's already happened.
Yeah.
So that helped me tremendously to have those experiences. We're all on an individual curriculum, of course, so everything happens different for all of us. But I find sometimes if you ask in sincerity, something will happen. You'll get some kind of an answer to help you, to show you that what the course is saying is the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a good example of that. What I was talking about at the beginning about how, well, the Holy Spirit meets you where you are. The idea of the script is written. The only thing I could understand at the time was the outcome was inevitable. And that was how the Holy Spirit worked with me until I had to shift myself and could see, how it's what it meant, that it meant exactly that. And yet there's this contradiction in the course, isn't there? I mean, where it's hammering away at choice,
Yes.
and responsibility, choice and responsibility.
But
and yet
of course,
the script is written.
it's right. But the choice, the way that it's been explained to me by Jay is that for every choice, that's what we have is only choice. We don't have free will, so to speak, because it says in heaven, our will was free. So here we have choice. That's our the only thing we really have here is the choice. And we're choosing, either ego or spirit. But whatever choice we make, what Jesus said is that has already been played out.
Exactly. So that's what I mean by it. You don't really have choice.
Yeah, in a sense. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you think about it, really, if you think about it, if there was such a thing as free will, then guilt would be real. I mean, and that's why I said what the course did was bring me in touch with my deepest belief that I have free will. And and then poof, said, oh yeah, no, you can't, you really can't. You know, I mean, this is what happened when I shifted, you know, but the
Yeah.
course really got me in touch with that, deep-seated guilt. And yeah, so we only seem to have choice. We feel it as choice, you know, we
Yeah.
feel we're making choices. Whether we're choosing, you know, what coat to buy, or whether we're talking about choosing in this moment to listen to spirit or ego. It's still already predetermined.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's great because it sort of takes
Exactly.
the weight off your shoulders.
Right.
Just
Yes, exactly.
Watch it unfolding.
Yeah, but of course, there's a cost to that, though. You know what I mean? Is you do lose your individuality in that, and your sense of, you know,
Yeah.
empowerment or what have you. A false sense, I should say, of empowerment. You know, but and that's why, you know, you can't see it until you can see it. You know, but you'll see it when you're ready to see it.
Exactly.
If that's your part to play, and some people never will. Some people never even get near it. You know, and it's still okay. Yeah.
It's all unfolding perfectly.
It's all unfolding perfectly. Yeah, it's just stepping back into that awareness.
It's like, let all things be exactly as they are.
Right.
And
Yes.
that's it.
Yeah. Right.
I have time for one more question, or do we want to wrap it up? It's entirely up to you, Liz.
Somebody got it?
Oh yeah. No, I planned on going to 11. I think you said it was a couple hours, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, that would be 2 o'clock your time, right?
Okay. So we have a phone number here, 161. You have your phone up, or your well, your phone is up and your hand is up. So feel free to take yourself off mute.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie and Liz. It's just wonderful to have the guidance that's coming forth with this gathering today. And my question relates exactly to what was, well, not exactly, but to what was just being discussed with respect to the script. And what I'm wondering, and it's too bad that it sounds like Dove's not there anymore because he would know the exact quote, but maybe you do or others do as well. In the, I can't remember if it's a teacher's manual or one of the work lessons, but the quote that says something to the effect of what could you possibly not accept if you knew that everything,
you knew that everything that was
happening,
yeah, right, was gently planned by one who knew, what is it? What could you not accept if you knew that everything was gently planned by one who, something like, had your best interest at heart?
Better good.
Yeah. One who.
Yeah, and so in light of the script, and there's another reference then in association with that in the, I believe it is the manual, that says each one will go as far as they can go, and some might pause for a while and then continue. And so you get a sense of it, well, it sounds like this is even a continuation through lifetimes, or, you know, so in that the script is written, whatever's going on for any of us, it's kind of like, well, you're going to go as far as you're going to go. And, you know, that then there may be, you know, the resumption of that at another point on the misperceived timeline that we all think we're on that doesn't exist. So just wondering about your thoughts.
Yeah, you're talking like reincarnation, which doesn't make sense to me, because what we're seeing is we're just watching characters pass by. There are no individual souls or spirits. So we attain, it's hard to describe this, but we attain perfection all together as one, not individually. So everybody, you know, again, the tapestry idea, everybody is a thread in the tapestry. They are perfect. It's that perfect thread right where it's supposed to be in that tapestry. And they play that part and then it's gone. And it's hard to describe this, because I know when you're still identified with the person, it's hard to understand that the person, it's hard to understand, how do I explain this? It's hard to understand the wholeness from a personal point of view, is the best way to put it. the experience of whatever the person is appearing. And by that, I don't mean just the body and the personality, but even the thoughts and the feelings, all of that passes, all of consciousness passes, whatever is in consciousness passes. So we all get there together, is the best way to put it. By playing our part perfectly. I don't know if that's clear. It's hard to describe this. You know, the Course says in the Manual for Teachers, only one son is needed, one perfect son. Well, we're all that one perfect son together. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I can glimpse the wholeness conceptually.
Yeah.
But not there yet, but you know, I'm going as far as one can go. And so when I think of it in those terms, it's sort of like, yeah, well, what is there not to accept then? If each one of us is going to go as far as we can go, that's it. We're already there in terms of embracing. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and there's
totality.
the freedom of, and just accepting everything as it is, and understanding that it's whole and complete and perfect, and you can't fail. You cannot fail.
That's it. You can't fail.
You cannot fail.
But you have to give up judgment. That's the secret.
Yeah, but I find that if you get this, the judgment is just gone, because it then suddenly doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you forcing yourself to give up judgment, and that by saying that, let me get you to understand that it doesn't mean that I don't have my own ideas and opinions on things, or preferences even. I wish that things would turn out a certain way, but there's just an acceptance that they're going to turn out how they're going to turn out. So, I'm going to vote the way I want to vote. I'm going to get a shot because I believe the science. The people are not going to get the shot because they don't believe the science. That's their role to play. So I don't sit there and think, God, what idiots. No. I just think, okay, I believe the science and they don't, whatever, and it's like I'm far less, and I used to be a political junkie too, and it's like I'm far less tied into that stuff now. Never could force myself out of it because I, just was in a different mindset. But now that I understand, it doesn't mean that I don't like everything that's happening. I just accept, okay. And I recognize that's just a personal preference too. That's just a part of the unfolding atonement too, is whatever I feel about it. And again, all of that feeds into everything else. So my thoughts and feelings are a part of that. And so I'm just watching those as well. And just holding those feelings, not holding, because that makes it sound like I'm holding on, but I'm just having those feelings as they pass by.
Yeah.
So I might have a moment of intense upset about something, and then I'm just with it, and then it passes by. And then I just recognize that was a part of the atonement too. That must have put energy out there. Who knows what? Who knows what's going on? It's on a level I can't see.
Right.
It's like the ego in this realm actually likes to mimic heaven in many ways. In other words, there's really only one split mind.
Right.
As many
Exactly.
here. As in heaven, there's only one spirit and only one mind of God.
Right.
And when we really get the fact that there is only one mind here, it's very important to understand that concept, because the ego knows that there is only one of us here. There's only one split mind. And that's the part that the ego doesn't really want you to understand, because it wants to keep us separated.
Right.
Yeah. That's an important fact.
That's when the ego goes ballistic, when you actually begin to understand that on an experiential level.
Exactly. Yeah.
But as I went through my thing, I stopped feeling that it's a real personal thing. I had felt it before that way, as the ego was upset about. Now I just see it as the idea of the opposite of God. Right. And it's just being itself. You know what I mean? It's not personal. It's no more than the way that, when a lion takes down a gazelle, it just needs to eat. It's just being itself. It's not we say attacking it, but we don't mean it the way that we might attack somebody in a very personal way and have personal motivations. That's just nature. We accept that.
Yeah.
that's what's happening with ego. Ego is just being what ego is.
Right.
And ultimately it's benign. It has no real effects. It's just a damned uncomfortable thing to experience and go through. But that's because it's the opposite of God, and that's what it is, and that's all that's passing here. And that's what we're experiencing, is that passage, that idea passing through.
It feels its annihilation.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And of course, there is a line in the course that, you know, at first I never understood, but I certainly understand it now. It says the ego uses the body to conspire against the mind.
Right.
And that's what happens when you're really waking up. It uses the body to conspire against your awakening mind, you might say. Yeah.
Very good. It uses the personal I,
Yeah.
which is the body, of course.
Still trying to convince you that there is a personal I kind of thing.
Right.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your insights on that. It's appreciated.
And I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to be any more
This-
questions.
this-
And I'm going to tell you, this was an amazing session.
Yes.
Really beautiful.
Yeah. Excellent.
And
Fantastic.
Thank you for being
guys-
here and sharing and asking. And I thought a question came across. They wanted to know what are the titles of my books.
Yes.
yeah,
They can go to my website. They're all there. And you can go on Amazon. They're all on Amazon.
fantastic.
Yeah. And Lloyd was very much into the big white one, which is called,
Well,
The Message of A Course in Miracles.
Right.
yeah.
That's the translation of the text, right?
very helpful for those who are guided to it. It's helpful. It just
Very
gives-
helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Glad you
Okay.
like it.
Well, again, Liz, absolutely wonderful. Now, this recording is going to be on our Course in Miracles support group in about, 2 hours or so. So feel free to rewatch it or share it or whatever you're guided to do.
And
And
I'll put it
everybody-
up at my website as well, a link to it at my website and on Facebook and so forth.
That's fantastic. Now,
Fabulous.
I'd like to invite everyone to just unmute themselves and to thank Liz.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Liz.
That was good.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
you,
you,
You're
Liz.
Appreciate it.
And Liz, you
Welcome.
are one hell of a speaker.
Yes.
Even though there's no Liz.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yes, okay, that would be great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks
You're welcome.
again.
Thank you for having me.
Love
and
you.
thanks
Thank
everybody for
you.
being here.
Love
See you
you.
guys. Love you all.
Thank you.
Love you guys.
Okay.
Love you.
Love you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's awesome.